Hello and welcome to this CAUDIT product showcase, Modernise Collaboration for Hybrid Learning, presented by Global NTT. My name's Steve Johnston. I'm the Director of Strategic Procurement at CAUDIT. CAUDIT acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australasia and their connections to land, sea and community. In Perth, where I live, we recognise the Whadjuk Noongar as the traditional owners. We pay our respect to our elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, Maori and First Nation peoples today. Today we welcome NTT, a global top 5 technology and business solutions provider that believes in contributing to society through business operations by applying technology for good. Their services help clients accelerate their growth and develop new business models. I'd like now to hand you over to David Hanrahan, Senior Director, Go-to-Market at NTT. Thanks, David.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for making the time to join us today. As Steve said, I'm the Senior Director for Go-to-Market, responsible for all of the activities we do in the Microsoft space across NTT here in Australia. And today what we'd really like to do is step through some market observations and an insight into the hybrid workplace transformation capabilities of NTT and how they may be applicable in the education space. I'll then ask Charlie Dubeck, who's our Global VP of Managed Collaboration, to take us through the University College of London case study. Mario Da Silva from Microsoft will give us an insight to what's coming in the team space next. And then Craig Whittingham will really do the heavy lifting of drilling down into Operator Connect and the voice platform. That's really the underpinning solution behind all of the collaboration platform that we're going to talk to. So I'd really like to kick this off by considering how, as we move more and more towards this increasingly connected world, and it impacts all aspects of our daily lives and that desire to be remotely accessible, integrated. The whole importance of digital transformation became very apparent during the recent COVID experience, as we all know, but this is particularly so in the education space. The technology has become a really critical element of delivery of modern education. And the use of connected collaboration platforms is probably the key to this going forward. So we're really driven to transform, I think, predominantly by this need from students for more student centricity. There's this heightened focus on learners. Students are really clear in some of the research that we've done. They want to develop the skills to navigate their own learning. They want to explore and make choices that, as they say, unlock curiosity and potential. And they want to do that in a very personalised way. They expect us to deliver that through optimised and scalable technology. So it becomes really critical in shifting our education model driven by standardised courses and curricula to this student-centred model. It becomes critical that we're able to transform the technology landscape that supports it. This will also require teaching to shift to more of a coaching model, and technology advances should allow teachers to spend less time on those routine tasks, but give them new ways to understand and to connect and interact with their students. So NTT and Microsoft together see a number of emerging technologies that are already proving really powerful in this space. The modern collaboration platforms that we've all here on today give students that new opportunity to interact and work together, create customizable lesson plans, allow us to provide real-time personalised feedback. Artificial intelligence gives us the capability to see how those students are progressing and to customise and time their curation of content to them. And mixed reality is starting to create immersive learning experience for students, and it's really designed to drive that cognitive and social growth. But whichever way we look at it, these technology skills of tomorrow, getting them into the classrooms of today, are really all about the world in which we want to bridge the knowledge gap for future employability and scalable success. This way. So in today's session, we're focusing predominantly on the collaboration platforms and the voice technologies that support it. But I want to be clear that these are really just the foundational aspects of the successful implementation of the educational transformation framework from Microsoft that I'm sure you're all quite familiar with. Through that partnership with Microsoft, NTT can really work with you to understand the broader issues that are affecting the environment and what capabilities are available to allow you to complete that transformation. And I guess also importantly, we want to think about how we can maximize the value in the A5 license that you're already licensed for, and how to deliver those capabilities in a way that makes sense for the organization. For example, when we talk about that personalizing of the student experience, we can do this in a whole variety of ways. There's advances in natural language processing, machine learning, and educational content that allows us to modify content really rapidly and quite inexpensively, and it lets us deliver that highly personalized targeted curation for individual students. In the case study that Charlie will show us, we'll see how we can greatly enhance the inclusivity side of it using features like multilingual engagements, multilingual transcription, how we help diverse learners with a range of different ways to engage, inking, typing, video, audio, are a few of those examples. And historically, I'm sure that many of you, like me, think of these collaboration tools very much as a toolbox of individual tools. Skype for Business delivered our calling, SharePoint delivered our document our stores. But the pandemic and that rapid drive to virtual delivery really proved the importance of the integrated collaboration platform. I think we all learned pretty quickly that Teams can provide that complete platform of online services that allowed people to work remotely. It allowed opportunities for interaction inside and outside of the classroom. Students probably learnt to collaborate quickly across time zones. We've started to bring in multilingual contexts on group projects, so those types of things. So there was some significant upside. We've seen organisations start to leverage our voice services so that a Chinese student on a Chinese web page can chat via the collaboration, via the communication service with translation and transcription, for example. And in addition, we found that in that change, many students struggled in this collaborative world. And along with this increased ability to leverage the platform, we now need to use the data the platform generates to provide real-time feedback and optimize lesson engagement. And in doing so, I guess we can start to address things like that critical student success factor to make sure they complete their course, sign up for new ones, and go on and to become our alumni of the future. And this is where the complete capability of NTT across the Microsoft solution stack can really support your transformation, whether that's from a student or a teaching or a campus perspective. But fundamentally, so much of the power of the collaboration platform, it actually comes from the underlying communication capabilities. And today, that's really the key area we want to drill right down onto. So I'd like to hand over now to Charlie Dubeck, who's got up very early to join us from London, and have him take us deeper into the world of NTT, Teams and phone systems. So over to you, Charlie.
Thank you very much, David. So today, and nice to be here today, and thanks for having me. Today we're going to start with looking at the specific case of University College London and what we did with the university and how we accomplished some of the change and transformation within the university. So I thought before we go forward, we would start with a video to be able to kind of go through that case study first, and then I'll give some comments on the details of that. So. apologies if not everyone could. 1 second. Apologies if not everyone could see that video. We'll make sure there's a link to go out if anyone had technical problems in seeing the video. But a bit of a summary, during the different lockdowns and pandemic, we worked closely with UCL in taking all the different Microsoft stacks, enhancing e-learning, but also supporting the key business functions that UCL needed to keep running during the pandemic, whether that be the contact centers for incoming student inquiries, to virtual graduations, to being able to utilize change management and accessibility options to keep UCL functioning throughout the various lockdowns. And what it did is it really gave us a crash course in the needs that the university had from a virtual learning point of view. And basically, it gave us a lot of ideas too on things that we can implement within other universities when it comes to collaboration, productivity, and e-learning options. So during that video, that was just at the end of kind of the biggest lockdowns we had in London. I still had my COVID haircut at that time. And basically, at that point, we started working with other universities as well, and we launched a few new services during that time. So today, NTT is the global leader in Teams calling activation. So we activate more users than anyone with Teams calling, so the Teams telephony options. Also, though, we're a managed service provider for Teams collaboration. So we manage all different aspects of the M365 productivity stack through different types of managed services, depending on the needs of the IT groups within our customer base. So since then, we have about 2 million users under either managed services or telephony options from various different types of services as well. But we also support Microsoft's latest products and initiatives, such as Operator Connect, which is one of the new launches that we did over the last couple of months. And we're also doing some new launches with them going forward in the next 5 or 6 months to enhance the experience of our customers as we try to listen to our change management experts and our professional service experts to make sure we have the right tools, functionality, migration options, but also we're keeping in mind the needs and compliance needs of people in different verticals, whether that's universities, manufacturing, banking, and so on and so forth, because they all have very different features and functionality that they may be using. To get to know NTT, again, if you look at NTT Limited, which is the group that we're in, and NTT Data, we're just about 110,000 staff, and we focus on different parts of the journey that our customers take within the Microsoft stack. So we have a consulting group, application services group, managed service group, and our digital backbone that helps customers monitor tooling. So with this digital backbone, we have peering circuits into Microsoft Teams through Azure connections, which allows us to procure our services directly from Microsoft portals. So whether you're in the Microsoft Teams tenant, you can actually click on NTT's logo and select some of our services. But also this means that we have ticketing systems that are connected into Microsoft's back office. So this allows us to raise tickets, to support MACDs, and to help our users with monitoring tools, because in a lot of cases when we work with universities, they have lecture rooms that have specific equipment that needs to be working. Also, I mentioned we have lots of, during the lockdowns, lots of virtual graduations, so we do managed services for Teams live events as well, and that was something that we learned from those engagements. But also we found that some of the universities have a lot of legacy hardware that they sometimes need to keep running until they have the like-for-like solutions replaced by Microsoft. So we do a managed service for hybrid environments as well, so we can make sure that you're keeping your compliance needs as well in mind as you do transition to more cloud-based services. One thing that we're very excited to be launching with Microsoft later this year is a way that we're allowing the mobile user to use Teams calling. So we have a lot of cases where we have faculty within student campuses that are using a personal mobile phone and a supplied mobile phone from IT, so they're carrying around 2 mobile phones. And we're actually offering an eSIM solution coming later this year, which will allow you to bring your fixed line to your personal, bring your own device as well. So from a sustainability point, that means less devices out there, but also that means that the functionality of Teams calling can be extended to those that are not even using a fixed line, for example. So these are things that we're kind of learning in our engagements and co-innovating with Microsoft, and we should have a press release coming out about that later in October. When you look at the entire Microsoft stack and its relevance to e-learning and hybrid learning, we see kind of these key pillars that we support. First is the telephony side. In the case of UCL, we had to transition from legacy telephony and turn off that telephony and move to a modern telephony world. And then in the collaboration sense, we support end users, so students that have trouble with Teams. We can act as an overlay of an IT team to support those users. We can also support the meeting rooms and MTRs or Microsoft Teams rooms as well. But we do support endpoints as well as far as Teams phones. At the university, it was very important that people had physical handsets that we worked with UCL, so we managed those handsets as well. And we also are looking at things like Microsoft Viva and the productivity suite as well to manage some of those outcomes for customers that have very stretched IT teams. So again, as Microsoft continues to co-innovate, that's something that keeps coming up in a lot of engagements. And lastly, one of the things that was important to UCL is they have a lot of temporary staff that work in a contact center sense. So there's a certain specific time of year where they have a lot of calls that come in as students want to secure their grades to make sure they get into UCL. So what we had to do is work with Microsoft on providing service numbers and professional services for all those people at home that are working as temporary agents. And that's something that's coming up more and more with our engagements in this space. So we work with Microsoft on Azure Communication Services now as well. But we also work with leading contact centers and integrate them with Microsoft Teams, which was in the case of UCL, so we could do all the call recording and compliance that they needed on the back of that. So we're learning with our customers, and we're offering different levels of managed services as well. Some IT teams are larger than others, so they might not need as much support. So we have different flexible offerings on how we can leverage our network and leverage our monitoring tools to add an additional value between us and Microsoft. So speaking of Microsoft, I think I'll pass over to someone I've known for a very long time, Mario Da Silva, who's from Microsoft here to talk about the technology in a bit more detail. Over to you, Mario.
Hey, Charlie, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Mario Da Silva. I'm a specialist at Microsoft that's worked in the unified communication space for more than 10 years, actually, and see the evolution of the UC platform and the services. And I like to call it a platform because I think quite often customers look at unified communications or Teams today as a video conferencing or a work from home solution or a phone system solution. But Teams is really a platform that leverages your M365 or your A5 or even your A3 licensing very effectively by using OneDrive, SharePoint, and all these other platforms that sit behind it to provide you a great collaboration experience, a great VC experience, and a great PABX platform as well. So I'm not going to dwell on this a lot, but I'm sure everyone realizes that we've been in lockdown, especially I'm based in Melbourne, the state that was locked down the most out of all the states in Australia. And I think everyone will agree that over the COVID outbreak, remote has become a core part of how students are consuming teaching and learning. Back office staff are being able to service student requirements as well, because without the need to go into the office. And I think what that's going to do, and we're seeing that in universities today, is originally university was where you went to learn something, and it was a physical brick and mortars that you went into in the auditorium that you sat for your lecture. Over the COVID break, it all went to 100% virtual. What we're seeing now that things are opening up again, that a lot of universities are thinking is, how do we think of some, at least, components of our education services that we're providing? We lead with virtual first, with the option to be physically present in a room as well to absorb that information and to go through that learning experience. So that's where we're seeing a whole change from an educational outcomes perspective. From a telephony perspective, Microsoft Teams adoption has gone through the roof, and I've got a slide later that'll talk to that. But I think what we're seeing now, as people are coming back into the office, the universities, corporate staff, banking and finance customers are beginning to ask the question, why do we need a separate phone system that had a handset sitting on a desk while we were in lockdown and didn't really provide any services to us. Why don't we consolidate that into Teams? And NTT as a partner is well positioned to help you deliver on that outcome, consolidating that experience into Teams and providing it to you as a service. And this really brings it into the next one, which is the pressures on IT. I think gone are the days when IT wanted to manage servers, patch machines, and do all those kind of things. Software as a service is becoming the norm in most organizations. And having Teams as a SaaS model, as well as having telephony as a service through NTT, brings both those worlds together to provide you a complete as a service model with an OpEx structure around it. I mentioned the Teams adoption and uptake. Prior to COVID, we had something like 70 million monthly active users on the Teams platform. COVID hit, and that number, as of March this year, in fact, I need to update those numbers, but as of March this year, we had roughly 270 million users on the Teams platform using it on a day-to-day basis, right? You can see the Teams phone active user count is 12 million today as well. That is only growing even after people coming back and things opening up again. Those numbers are still growing exponentially because customers are looking at how they can rationalize their licenses with vendors. How can they maximize the investments that they've got from a CAUDIT perspective with Microsoft on the A3 or the A5 licensing SKUs that you might already have access to today. For those of you who are so inclined as to see what analysts are saying, I know some customers take it with a grain of salt. Some customers base their decisions on this. So whichever camp you sit on, I'll let you be the judge of that. But from a Microsoft perspective, Gartner has rated Microsoft as a top right-hand corner for 3 years in a row in their Gartner Magic Quadrant for Unified Communications, or UCaaS as a service. Right. So just to give you a sense where the analysts are thinking from a Microsoft perspective as well. Now, there's a video here. I'm not going to talk about it. It's one of your own universities as part of University of New South Wales. Really, if you get a few minutes, play this video. You might have already seen it, then great. But I think play this video because it actually shows you how University of New South Wales is actually using Teams to change the way they deliver educational services to their students, right? It's not talking about telephony. It's not talking about meeting rooms. It's talking about how do you use all the assets within your A3 and your A5 license to actually deliver student outcomes and deliver more engaging experience for your students in a classroom, or a virtual classroom, I should say. Whoops, wasn't meant to play the video. Let me skip through that. I wanted to talk about the innovation we're bringing within Teams as well. So we're not, just because Teams has got a great adoption and a great traction, it's not something we're going to sit back and say, hey, this is the best and the greatest you can get. We're continuing to innovate in that space. So if you look at the background behind me on the video that's coming through, you'll notice there's new Teams rooms layouts that we're bringing to, which provides you a more immersive experience. Where historically, if you did it in about 15 years back with some of the other vendors you might have had relationships with, you might have installed telepresence rooms, which cost you anywhere north of $250,000 to set up a room. We're providing that with certified kit from Microsoft today, which can give you close to that same experience, immersive, engaging meetings experience on the platform. Also, what we're doing is releasing Microsoft Mesh for Teams. Mesh will let you deliver more immersive lectures. Charlie mentioned graduation ceremonies. Think of the world where people cannot travel in for a graduation ceremony and actually have it in the metaverse, right? Where people attend it through avatars and those kind of experiences. Now, some customers do have access to this already who are on the early adopters, but this will be available mainstream in the second half of this calendar year. But really taking that innovation and driving that and helping people have a greater immersive experience and more engaging experience through the platform itself. With that, let me hand over to Craig Whittingham, who's going to walk you through the next few minutes of the session.
All right, thanks, Mario. Hey guys, so yeah, I'm going to run you guys through what NTT does around the Operator Connect offer and why it might be important to you guys as well. So we've got a fair amount to get through here, so we'll just get going with it. All right, so we're going to talk about Operator Connect here. Let me just jump forward. All right, so there's a couple of things that I want to cover off as we go through this, right? And I'll kind of dive into exactly what Operator Connect is. But I just wanted to start with a couple of things that you might think about, well, why would I want to look at some of this, right? So we're all familiar with the use of Teams, and we've all got very used to it over the last little bit. And so Operator Connect is kind of a natural extension of the telephony aspect into Teams. And the great thing for clients like yourselves is that for most of the clients that we deal with anyway, you've already got the A5 or E5 licenses in your M365 subscription. So you can take advantage of this at really no cost in terms of the Microsoft licensing side of things. And then there are some significant ROIs that you get through this process as well. And I'll go into that a little bit deeper later. But the average saving that we see for most clients in these environments is around about 50% of their spend. So that's a significantly different experience to what we've traditionally had in the UC world, right? So, we've traditionally deployed UC. We've always sold it on this aspect of, well, you're going to get great collaboration and people are going to be able to talk easier and you're going to get all these soft benefits, right? This is not like that. This is actually one of those things where you can put your hand on your heart and say, we're going to save $3.4 million over 5 years, right? And you're going to have those savings, right? And you're basically moving your telephony to NTT. And so we'll dive into that as well, right? So obviously in line with that, there's a whole heap of other stuff that come with that as well through enhancing the Teams environment, right? Around, how you guys interact with people, students and faculty and that kind of stuff, right? And then the things that often come up, which we'll kind of dive into again later, are things around the contact center solutions, right? So how do you do that? How do you migrate your numbers in, all those kind of things? And we'll kind of get to that as well. And often the other question that comes up is, how do I integrate this with legacy systems that I might have that I don't want to actually migrate off today? So we'll cover all of those aspects as we go through this. All right. So what is Operator Connect? So in order to kind of frame this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take us back a little bit in time and talk about the history of kind of telephony just briefly, right? And how we got to where we are at the moment. So some of you might remember, the good old days when we had ISDN services, right? And we would go to our carriers and we'd say, hey, I need another, 100 numbers and a 30-channel PRI, please. And the carrier would say, sure, you can have that. It'll be 60 working days. And we'll have to drag a cable in off the street and connect it for you and all that sort of stuff, right? And then we moved on to kind of SIP provisioning, where the carriers would largely do the same kind of thing, right? They would just put an SBC on your premise instead of an NTU. They would still drag a line in. It would typically be an MPLS circuit, that kind of stuff. And then after that, we moved into the true SIP provision over the internet with products like direct routing as a service, which is a way of getting the calling numbers in and out of Teams. And then now we're moving onto Operator Connect, right? So what I want you to think about as we're going through this is that Operator Connect is really just the ability for you guys to be able to get telephone numbers into your Teams environment, right? So it's actually no more complicated than that. So from an end user perspective, they're just going to be able to make and receive telephone calls, right? And from an administrator point of view, there are a lot of differences, and we'll kind of dive into what those differences are shortly, right? But it's a much simpler, easier way to deliver things. So as I said, in the past, you might go to a carrier and they might say, right, it's going to be 30 or 60 days to get your lines enabled. With Operator Connect, I'll show you in a couple of slides here. You can just go in and do it natively via the portal, and typically the numbers are provisioned and available in your portal, within a couple of hours, in minutes in some cases. So we'll show you guys what that looks like as well. So what does it actually look like in the admin portal, right? So again, this is a very different experience, or will be a very different experience for most of you guys. So today you can just go straight into your Teams admin portal. You can go into the operator section of that admin portal. You can select NTT as your carrier, and then you can start selecting how many numbers you want and where you want them. And as we'll get into a little bit later, one of the advantages of this is you could say, you know what, I've got campuses in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide, Toowoomba, and Christchurch and Wellington, right, in New Zealand. And you can actually go into this portal and you can say, I'll have 50 numbers in Christchurch, I'll have 50 numbers in Auckland, please, I'll have 30 numbers in Toowoomba, or I want 50 numbers in Brisbane. And you can just click on them and say, yes, I want that. Click, click, next, okay, bang, and you're actually done. And then those numbers are automatically provisioned by our system and delivered into your team's environment. So what it means for clients like yourselves is that now you can actually go in and you can natively get those numbers, right? So you're no longer going out to your carrier and waiting 30 days to get those. You can get those numbers immediately, and you can reconfigure them as you need them too. So as things change within your environment, let's just say maybe you're planning a big enrolment campaign for, let's say it's Toowoomba, right, in Queensland. So what you can do is you can actually organise numbers for that location. You can allocate those numbers to users, and you can do all of that from directly natively within the Teams admin console. So how is this different to direct routing? So some of you might be thinking, well, we've had this for a while with direct routing, and the reality is, well, yeah, in terms of the end user experience, just being able to make and receive calls, it's largely the same as direct routing, right? But where it differs is in the actual back-end technicalities of it. So for those people who have deployed direct routing, you're probably familiar with all the PowerShell scripting and all the complex configuration that you need to do in Teams to get it working, right? Well, in Operator Connect, all of that disappears. So it is literally a click, click, next type operation. And if you're like most of the clients that we see, most of the configuration work is being done by people who are not necessarily telephony experts, right? And not necessarily Teams experts. So you can really kind of take reception style staff and you can get them to do a lot of the telephony configuration work in Operator Connect. And key to that is just the usability of it, because it's all driven via that portal, right? Now, where it's different from an architecture point of view, apart from the admin side of things, is in the way that it's actually connected into Teams. So for those of you who are familiar with direct routing, that was connected over the internet. Operator Connect is not connected that way. So in Operator Connect, NTT actually delivers SBCs on the Microsoft backbone, right? So we're directly connected in the same data centers as Microsoft are for Teams. So it means that we can deliver calls directly into Teams on your behalf without needing to traverse the internet to get to it. Now, why that's important is that for universities in Australia, almost everybody, or educational institutions in Australia, almost everybody is connected in some way, shape or form to ARNet, right? And ARNet is actually already connected into the Microsoft Azure data centers as well. So it means that all of your calls, whether they're internal calls or external calls, will travel natively over private backbone. So you don't have an internet connectivity piece that you need to worry about. The other advantage of this from an architecture point of view is that because it's delivered using APIs, as I said, you know, when you order numbers, just an API call goes into NTT and then we provision those numbers on the SBC. But the follow-on benefit of that is actually in the support agreements. So no longer are you kind of in a situation where if you've got a problem with calling, you ring NTT, or if you've got a problem with Microsoft, you have to call Microsoft and they'll work through the Teams issues. With Operator Connect, you can just call NTT as that kind of quote unquote one throat to choke. And we will run the problem to ground with Microsoft on your behalf and report back to you when that issue is resolved. And we'll do that regardless of whether the problem is ultimately an NTT issue or whether it's a Teams issue, right? So you've got that kind of one number that you can call to give you guys help on. So as I said, this is all connected in with Microsoft Azure. So we're located in all the different peering points. Now, for a lot of you guys, you've probably got campuses in Asia, or you've certainly got recruiting campaigns that happen in Asia as well. So again, all of these calls will traverse the backbones. One of the nice things about NTT is that we actually have numbers available in 39 plus countries today, and we're continuing to expand on that every month. So almost all of the countries where you guys would potentially need telephone numbers, we can provision them for you. So that means if you decided, well, we're going to run a campaign in Singapore next month, we can give you numbers in Singapore probably within a couple of hours, and you guys can provision those yourselves. You can just go into the portal, just select, I'd like to use NTT, I'd like 50 numbers in Singapore, please, click, next, and in an hour or two, you've got those numbers and you can start assigning them to end users. So as I said, a very different user experience to what a lot of people have been used to. So the use cases for Operator Connect are really the same ones that we see across the direct routing and telephony platforms where people have been migrating from, maybe a traditional voice infrastructure and moving across to Teams, right? So, we do see the room systems, video interoperability, all those kind of things are definitely things that need to be looked at. The other really key thing about Microsoft Teams is that it's really an ecosystem of components, right? So there are a lot of different components that come into it. So in the traditional world, we all kind of bought our PBXs from one vendor, right? We might have had an NEC PBX and we might have had NEC handsets, right? And in the Teams world, that's kind of delivered over a number of different vendors, with Microsoft delivering the call routing through Teams, and then potentially, vendors like Audio Codes doing the SBCs, or Yealink and Polycom doing the handsets, et cetera, right? So what that means for clients like yourselves is that having a partner that can work across that entire ecosystem is really something that you need to be looking at, right? Not just as a partner that's an expert in Microsoft. And that's true, especially when you start to look at the security aspects of it as well. So I've already talked about the 39 countries that we have, flexibility, all that sort of stuff, so I'm not going to run through that. NTT does offer a number of additional services that you can add on to Operator Connect, and some of which we're seeing some really interesting use cases for. So one of which is compliance recording. So we're seeing this particularly with the finance industry as well, but more and more we're seeing recording happening in the education sector as well. And the interesting thing about the compliance recording is that we can also do things like we can look at translation of telephone calls both ways. And that can actually happen live as well. So we do have a client in the education sector at the moment, and they were running Teams calls and using the native Teams capabilities to be able to do translations for Chinese students for applications and those kind of things. So they could have someone sitting in Australia who was looking at the enrollment of those students, but the students were actually talking in Chinese and it was being translated back into English for the enrollment officers and that kind of stuff. So there's some interesting things going on there. The compliance recording, or the recording solutions, can also do things like sentiment analysis. So you can pull up reports and say, show me all the calls where the students were mildly angry or were happy, or choose one other sentiment that you're looking for, right? And of course, Teams is an ecosystem, as I said. So you really need to look at how's this going to integrate with your contact center, how my room system's going to work. And then often in universities, you have a lot of analog devices sitting around too, whether they're the traditional fax lines that you've got sitting around, or whether they're, lift room phones, or, phones that you've got spread around the campus for students to use as well. Yep, so they're kind of all over the place. So as I said, the calling plans are available across 39 plus countries. And I'm sure that most of the places that you guys need to look at, we've got covered, with more coming as we move along. So I talked about the ecosystem support. So this is something that shouldn't really be or should be looked at quite significantly as you move through choosing a partner, right? Because of the fact that you do have such a huge amount of vendors that you potentially have involved in a Teams environment, right? So NTT has a breadth of ecosystem support, and of course we can take first call resolution on almost all of the vendors that you're going to be working with as a part of your Teams environment. So just conscious of time, I want to make sure we leave a little bit of time for questions at the end. So I think we'll move on to the ROI analysis and the business case. So this is actually something that NTT do for clients all the time. We do this as a free engagement. So if you guys are willing to sit down with us and share your existing telephony bills, we can put those import those bills into a tool that we have that will then give you the business case and the ROI that you need to go back into your business to discuss, moving to NTT. So what I wanted to do today was just share with you one from within your industry. So this is actually an Australian university that we're working with at the moment. This is actually the business case and ROI summary that we did for these guys. This does look like a little bit of a messy kind of slide. There are a couple of things that I just want you to be aware of, though, and that's probably the last two rows or in this piece of Excel that we're seeing here. So this involved the one-time costs to move to NTT, which are all absorbed in year one. Now, for this particular client, their savings in year one was still 25% of their total telecoms bill, right? And over the 5 years, we were saving them just under $500,000 on their telephone bills for this particular one. Now, ironically, you know, for this particular organisation, that was around about 50% of their total telco spend. So what that then enabled them to do was take that money that they were saving and then reinvest that money into other aspects of their telephony environment that they wanted to upgrade. So, for example, they could go and buy brand new room systems, right? Or like a lot of universities or a lot of education institutions at the moment, you know, cost is a real factor at the moment, right? So being able to go back to the business and say, hand on heart, hey, if we invest this money up front, even in first year, we're going to save 25% of our telco spend. And every year after that, we're going to save roughly 55% on our telco spend. So that's a very easy argument to have with the financial controllers, right? And as I said, very different to the traditional UCAS discussions that we would have with the finance people, that sort of stuff. So kind of how do you guys start with this? All right, so we have a number of different processes that we can run you through. So I mentioned the ROI analysis. We also have a cloud deployment framework that we run through with clients, and that involves, there's a series of Microsoft-funded pilots. Often the questions that we get from clients are, well, how do I actually get started? What do I do about the legacy systems that I've got? How do I manage my telephone numbers that I've already got that I don't want to get rid of? So these workshops to really flush out all of those things and to flush out the edge cases that we see around the analog devices and devices that you may want to keep in your business, right? And then once you've actually moved to Teams, you know, how do you support that, right? Do you want NTT to take that on as a fully managed service? So we have the capability of taking the keys and driving the bus fully for you, or do you want a support service where your own internal staff continue to support it and you've got what I would call kind of phone a friend type support model, right? When something goes wrong, you can call us. So we can offer you both of those models as well. So that gives you guys an overview of what we wanted to share with you today on Operator Connect. We will be around for questions and answers, and I think we've left ourselves probably 10 or 15 minutes for question and answers. So I'll pass it back to you guys.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And we do have quite a few questions that have come through in the chat. Some of them have already been answered, which is great, but we might just highlight some of the answers that have come through. So we've had a number of people asking about existing numbers and porting existing numbers in combination with obviously standard dial-ins and unusual dial-ins like 1300 numbers and 1800 numbers. Are you able to give a quick overview as to the migration of numbers and how flexible that is?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I guess the first thing that I would say is that as we move through this journey with a lot of clients are really wedded to their existing numbers, right? So there is the capability to port numbers across there. So if you wanted to move your 1800 numbers, your 13 numbers, and all of your regular calling numbers to NTT, that's probably what we do for maybe 80% of our clients is we move the numbers across and then so they don't have to change their numbers at all. But for the other 20% of clients, what we're seeing at the moment is we're seeing a lot of clients move to more, external communications happens through the contact center. So they have 13 numbers that are advertised, so they move those to us. But in terms of the user numbers, we're seeing a lot of clients where they're actually dumping their old telephony number ranges, right? They're actually not porting them across at all, and we're providing them brand new numbers. And the reason that that's happening is that for most of us these days, we tend not to dial telephone numbers, right? We tend to click to dial people, right? So we want to connect with a person. We don't want to connect with a number. So for most of us, it doesn't really matter what number that person's got as long as we can right click on them and go call. So we do support both options. And as I said, probably 80% of our clients move at least some numbers across to NTT as part of this process and porting numbers. But we do have a significant number of clients who choose to take brand new numbers. So both options are available to you, and certainly, for example, in the example I gave, if you were running a marketing campaign in Singapore, for example, and you needed numbers in a hurry, then yeah, you can get them in a couple of minutes. Whereas if you needed to port numbers, then that's probably a couple of week-long process to get that. And the reason for that is that we've got to organise with your existing carrier to release those numbers to us, right? So, yeah, so both options are available.
Thank you. Someone's asked if Operator Connect is available in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. Is that one of the countries that you support?
Good question. Hang on one second. Let me go. I don't know where we are. With
maybe a question for afterwards.
Yeah, I can provide a. We're working on many deployments in that in that neck of the woods. So due to regulation, calling that is happening in the UAE has to be regulated locally. So what we do is we usually work with a local appliance and tie it into the overall configuration. So the good thing that we've built is we have one of the world's largest direct routing environments, and it's connected to our Operator Connect environment. So we usually have customers that will do 80% Operator Connect, maybe 20% direct routing for companies for countries where they need local appliances. So what we usually do is we look at if we can get a minimum size device into the country at the part of the UAE that the site is on, and then we work with a local carrier to provide the numbers. But when a user calls in, whether they're from Australia or the UAE, it's the same. Same monitoring tools, same setup. So that's very common. We work with companies like Siemens where they have 80 sites, and we try to make it a consistent experience. So not available for Operator Connect, but we are looking to make it available and a part of a new initiative that we're working on Microsoft called hybrid telephony, where we actually bring in a local SBC cluster in the key countries that we want to provide, like India, China, UAE. So we are working on that as well.
Excellent. We have also got a question here around, multi-use environment. So where a university, say, has an existing on-premise contact center and they would like to add, team numbers to that using Operator Connect in some way. What capability have you got in terms of integrating or doing call groups, etc., between Teams numbers and existing PABX numbers, or is that very bespoke?
No, it's actually what we see most clients doing, right? So a lot of clients are ready to move the bulk of their telephony users to Teams, but they're often quite wedded to their contact centers, and the contact centers are not necessarily moving anywhere at the moment, right? So the integration between Teams and the contact center is definitely something you can do. So you can mix and match, as Charlie said, the direct routing and the Operator Connect offer. So you can use direct routing to connect to a contact center, whether that could even be a cloud offer from someone like Genesis or NICE, and then you can still use Operator Connect for all of the regular users. And then you can also do shortcode dialing between the systems if you need to as well, right? So we have certain clients who want to run their contact centers on premise, and so we can have a direct trunk to that on-premise contact center, and that enables them to do things like pass off calls between the contact center agents and the rest of the university or the rest of the institution. Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Probably also worth noting just there, Steve, that we're also working with Microsoft, a number of clients here in Australia on the new Dynamics Contact Center capabilities as well. And we're delivering the first clients here in Australia leveraging that. So again, it's sort of bringing that whole stack approach together along with the voice elements we've been talking about today.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the universities are looking at this sort of thing, are going to move these things in stages. So the first stage might be to move end users to Teams, and then when the contact center comes up for a refresh, is when they might look at the Dynamics contact center. So being able to continuously integrate both is obviously very important.
Yeah, exactly. We're also seeing a lot of clients move from on-premise contact centers to the cloud offers as well. Yep. So
sure. Yeah, we're definitely seeing that as well. Because if you start having staff members working from home, you really want them to be able to join the contact center from wherever it is they are, if they're going to be a remote agent, etc. I've got a question related to Cisco Call Manager handsets that are currently using Teams for telephony. How would you migrate those, and how does that integrate with the offering from NTT and Operator Connect?
Yeah, so that is something that comes up all the time. So there are a number of the Cisco handsets that are pre-approved for Microsoft Teams. So there is a SIP load that you can get for the Cisco handsets that will enable them to actually register with the SIP gateway provided by either NTT or Microsoft. You do end up with a kind of limited functionality though, right? So you do end up with a handset that's able to make and receive calls, but largely that's about it. So we do see clients who are doing that in selected locations that they want them, for example, in meeting rooms or common areas, those kind of things. We don't tend to see that happening for end users though, right? So end users tend to be moving either to headsets and doing the telephony through their laptop or PC, or we see them taking dedicated Teams phones. And one of the other things that a lot of people also don't consider is that by the time you expend the engineering effort to go and convert the Cisco phone to Microsoft, get it configured, up and working and all that sort of stuff, you're often approaching the cost of a brand new Teams handset anyway. So in some cases, it can actually be more cost effective to replace the Cisco handsets with Teams ones, Teams native ones. And you get the better functionality as well.
Sure, good answer. Do you have the ability to handle digital fax?
We do. So NTT provides a cloud fax solution, which we do for both inbound and outbound faxes. It's basically a fax to email type solution. So it's licensed basically on a per user basis. So clients can decide how many users they want to have. For inbound faxes, we just deliver to an email address, and then the organization can decide if that gets spread out to a distribution group. For outbound faxes, we license on per user. So you just tell us which email addresses need to be able to send faxes, and we configure that in our system. So Steve, if you wanted to send a fax, you would just address your email to the number that you wanted to send it to at fax.com and hit send on your exchange. So there's no client that you need to install or anything like that. You just attach the files in an email, send them to the at fax.com email address, and we handle the delivery, and then we send you back an email to say whether that fax was successfully delivered or not. So that's actually quite a cheap solution too for most clients, for those ones who are still using fax.
Yeah, sure. I did ask the question, but I was thinking the first thing I need to do is teleport back to 2005 before needing to do it. But other than that, we're all okay.
We do have a lot of government entities, ironically, that are still wedded to fax as part of their process, right? So it is something that still comes up, yeah.
It is. Someone's asked about the return on investments in comparison to, they've named a competitor, but in comparison to your competitors, have you got documentation around return on investment, timeframes and those sorts of things? They've named Ring Central, but obviously there's many competitors. Have you got that documentation?
Yeah, we're happy to share that with it. So yeah.
Yeah. One thing I would add that makes us very different than telcos and other unified communication providers is we are predominantly a managed service provider and an aggregator. Despite our name, NTT, is really going back to our Japan roots. So with UCL, what we did is we did persona mapping and looked at who needs numbers and who doesn't, because we're not defending any territory here. We're not trying to keep people on old services, right? So basically, what we did is we persona map to say these people need service numbers. They may not need a contact center. These people need fixed line. These people probably just need VoIP, right? And we were able to lower UCL's overall telephony spend and third-party telco spend significantly. And we do have some of that documented in case studies. We do have some return of investment services through our consulting practice that David might be able to add a bit more details on as well. But I would say that really is one of the differences for us is we're not a traditional telco. So usually our average deployment is about 1/3 the telco coverage that those companies would have had previously, because we try to actually initiate change as opposed to just doing like for like to get that cost savings in place, if that makes sense.
Sure. I've got another question with regards to international calling. So if universities need to make calls out to various international numbers, how are those calls actually routed? Are they broken out in the closest target country or least cost routing, or how is that managed?
Yeah, good question, Steve. So they are least cost routed across our network. So that's one of the other advantages of NTT being a global carrier. So let's just say a particular institution, had an office in Singapore. I keep picking on Singapore, but let's just say they did. And you wanted to make some telephone calls to the Singapore office, then all of those numbers are effectively free calls to the local office. And then anything that goes out to Singapore, to someone outside the office would be a local call, right? Breakout from Singapore office. So yeah, you get the benefit of that least cost routing across NTT's global backbone.
Perfect. Okay, and that's true for any of the regions for which you've got a breakout set of numbers. So is that the same set of numbers that you can, where you're selling numbers as well? Is there one
Correct.
set of?
It is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Excellent.
Correct. Yep.
Perfect. So no confusion at all. That's fine. I think we are all out of numbers, and we're at 1:58 p.m. over here in Perth. So I think what we'll do is we'll wrap up now. So I'm just going to do a quick check of the Q&A. No, everyone's used the chat functionality. Oh, we've got one question. They've used the Q&A, so I'm going to ask it because we're trying to encourage that. What's the impact of transitioning from Telstra telephone numbers to new NTT numbers? Do you have any? Can existing numbers be used? You've answered that, I'm sure, already. And do you have any agreement in place with regards to number groups in particular?
So yeah, so we do actually port numbers across from Telstra all the time. So we have agreements with all of the major carriers to be able to move numbers backwards and forwards if we need to. So that is the porting process that I talked about. But as Charlie mentioned, it's often, we're not really defending any territory here, right? So we don't have a particular slant. So people can look at it and say, well, you know what, I don't actually need those 1,000 numbers that I had last year, right? Universities and education in general are a really interesting use case for this, because the businesses that you guys run today is fundamentally different to the business that you ran 2 years ago, right? And it'll probably be fundamentally different in 5 years' time. So this is a great opportunity to have a look at what does the particular institution need today and looking forward, rather than should we pull through all of our legacy setups and legacy numbers and all those kind of things. But we do have clients who want to do that, right? So there is that capability there. But often there's a lot of savings to be made in dropping old numbers and old number ranges.
Excellent. Okay, so look, we'll wrap up now. So thank you very much for your time. It's appreciated. There is a link to an email address in the chat if you would like to follow up and have any discussions with the NTT team. Just email au.info@global.ntt and they'll be able to put you in touch with the appropriate salesperson in your area. Assuming that there are different regions, that's typically how universities, how organisations operate. So on behalf of CAUDIT, I'd like to thank NTT presenters for the showcase today. Thank you everyone for attending. The presentation slides for the session will be made available on the CAUDIT website shortly, and that's where you can also confirm those contact details. Thank you once again, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time.
Thank you all.